Morning, folks. It is Wednesday, March 27th, 2024. Um, and I'm coming with an update on the town budget. I mentioned in some of my previous videos I wanted to do a bit of a longer video focused just on some of the town budget stuff, rather than all of the general things that we sort of talk about from a council meeting. Last night we had our I couldn't tell you how many budget workshops or budget special meetings we've had. But we had our budget meeting last night. And finally, after what seemed like years, but has really been probably about 4 or 5 months, we approved a town budget, both operating capital budgets and a tax rate. This has been a very, very long time coming. I will tell you, this has probably been the least fun thing that I've gotten to do in a very long time. Lots of sleepless nights. Actually started getting gray hair in the last couple of months, which I fully blame on this, not my impending 45th birthday. Um, but there's a lot of stuff here. There's a lot of things that we talked about last night, a lot of things that we've talked about over the last couple of months as a council and staff that we've been trying to address. And None of it's easy, but I think that it is helpful to go through some of the pieces, how we got to where we are right now, um, the decisions that were made last night, and what we're going to be doing going forward. And so that's what I kind of want to cover. This is probably going to end up being a long video. I thought about breaking it up into a couple of different videos, but hopefully you have a chance to watch it, reach out, ask questions, anything like that. So I'm going to jump into some of the stuff that I presented last night. So I spent about the last week sitting down, going through all of the budget stuff, going through some of the history, and trying to encapsulate some of the decisions and some of the actions that have happened over the last couple of decades that have gotten us to the place where we were sort of forced to make some tough decisions. So I actually have all this stuff written down. I'll try and find a way to post some of it. First and foremost, what has happened over the last probably 15 to 20 years in the town is that our tax base has not been growing fast enough to keep up with the increasing costs of operating our town. Meaning that, while new homes are being built, there's not enough of them. While new businesses have entered, there's not enough of them to grow the tax base, to spread out the overall costs of the town as those costs have increased. Right, adding on more public safety officers, adding on just increased costs for everything that we do. So but what also has happened at the same time is that our tax rate has not grown enough to keep up with those increasing costs. There's really two ways that you increase revenue for a town. You grow your tax base, or you grow your tax rate. Our tax base has not been growing fast enough to keep up with increasing costs, and neither has our tax rate. So it's left us in a position where the town has been for more than a decade, probably I'm going to go back at least about 15 years as far as I can find, where we have been dependent on balancing our operating budget using one-time funds, or money out of our utilities, our water, sewer, and electric. And and then we've also, when we couldn't do it with using those things, we stopped doing some other stuff. We started borrowing money. We stopped paying into our legacy pension plan after we switched over to the county munis plan for most of our employees. So we've put ourselves over a long time in a position where we are stuck. And we've been balancing the budget with money that should be being used in other places. So without a true capital plan and operating plan and having those budgets separate, we've basically been restricting council's ability and the staff's ability to adequately understand what our capital needs are. We understand when something happens, right? A sewer line fails and you have to jump in and do whatever it takes to fix things like that. Fortunately, we've got a great staff who, will work through Christmas and things to make that happen. But there's also all of the capital planning that's looking forward, right? We don't always want to be reactive. How do we plan for additional infrastructure? How do we plan to replace infrastructure before it fails? And we really haven't had the ability to do that because we haven't had a capital budget, a separate capital budget until really last year. So it's been a really tough thing to figure out how we plan for the future when ultimately we're using every penny that we've got to balance our operating budget. We have used roughly, this year I think the number was projected to be something like 4.5, or actually in the end it would have been closer to $5.5 million of revenue that's generated by our water, sewer, and electric funds to balance our operating budget. Every penny that would be extra generated from those utilities that we can provide is being used to pay for operations. The problem is that a lot of that money should be being dedicated towards capital items, towards replacement, towards planning for the future. And that hasn't been happening. We haven't had those funds because we've been using all of them. What it's meant, without putting those funds into some sort of a capital reserve or using them for that, is that every time we have something go wrong, we have to go out for debt. Right now, our debt payments for the town are about $2.2 million a year for capital projects. That's our bonds and SRF funds. And that's just projected to keep growing because we don't have a reserve of money that we can tap into when we need to do things like build a water tower, right? Or build an electric substation, probably one of the biggest things that's coming down the road towards our community in the next few years. And so we've continually had to go out for debt because we haven't planned for these essentially foreseeable capital costs. These are things that the town has probably known realistically that we were going to have to do for a very long time, but we just haven't taken the action to plan for those in the future. It's not unreasonable for towns to go out for debt, use bond financing and things like that in order to pay for stuff, right? It's hard to save up $15 million to pay for an electric substation. But if you're not planning for that debt and you're not making sure that you've got the funds to do it, you can end up in a position where you're maybe taking on more debt than you can afford to. We're not there, but that's the direction that we were heading. And it's one of the really, really challenging things that the town was needing to face. Another big issue that we have had is that the town has utilized every penny of one-time funds in our operating budget. So these are monies that are coming in that are not reliable. They're market driven or cyclical, right? So real estate transfer taxes is a big one here. During the pandemic, real estate transfer taxes, we were bringing in a couple of $1 million a year. But that dropped off like crazy this last year. We saw real estate transfer taxes get cut more than in half. If you're balancing your budget based on one-time money and that one-time money drops, you have a problem. And that's what we've seen in the last year. Going back, you can imagine back in 2008 or so with the housing crisis, the town, if you were dependent on one-time money from real estate transfer taxes and other things like that, and you see those disappear, you're in a really, really tough position. We've been living off of that money. Every penny of those one-time funds has been going into this sort of catch-all operating budget. The big ones there is real estate transfer taxes and impact fees. The town collects a number of different types of impact fees, some of which are pass-throughs, money that we don't get. The school impact fee, the fire and ambulance impact fees, those are pass-throughs. But there are impact fees that we collect that are intended to pay for capital expenses. That would be water impact fees, electric impact fees. We now collect a police impact fee. We have a parks impact fee. All of that money is intended to come into the town and then be used for capital expenses associated with the growth of the community, right? We have more people move into town, so we need more money to help pay for more parks and upkeep. We have more people move into town, so we need more money to help pay for electric infrastructure. We have been using all of that one-time money to pay for the debt that we've had to take on and to pay for some of the what are honestly more operating expenses, especially the real estate transfer taxes. Living off of that money is living off borrowed time. If you see those things drop off, then all of a sudden you can't afford to pay your bills because you were living off of one-time money. And we really needed to find a way to extract those one-time funds from our operating budget. Um, and then the last big thing that I think has caused a lot of problems in this current budget, but it was back in 2015, the budgeting cycle of 2015, so for the 2016 budget year, a decision was made to stop funding our legacy pension system. I don't know why. At the time, we were needed to pay about $400,000 a year into that legacy pension system. And it was about a 20-year cycle till we would have it fully funded when the last person that's still in that system retired. We stopped funding it. Now we need to pay about $1 million a year for the next 13 years to catch up. We're $5 million almost in additional money that we'll have to pay into that system because of that choice that was made. But that hasn't been in our budget for years. And that's $1 million expense that we have just been kicking down the road. And eventually it just gets worse, right? Compounding interest. Pensions are all about compounding interest. You put in this much at the beginning because it'll be this much by the time you go to take it out, right? Well, if you're not putting in this much, but you needed this much, you got to make it up. And that's where we're at. So those couple of different items are all long-term things that the town has been doing for a long time and we've known about. But for one reason or another, a choice was made to continue doing those things and continue basically living off of one-time funds and borrow money and not paying that legacy pension system. And then we hit COVID, where our labor market changes dramatically. Right? For a long time, we were in a position where folks were happy to have jobs, and a good, stable job working for a town was a great thing to have. It's the kind of thing you could rely on. Our labor market's changed, and it has had a huge impact, not just on Smyrna, but every community. We are competing for our electric linemen, for our police officers, for our finance staff in ways that we've never had to compete before. Our unions have negotiated fairly and rightfully, right? It is their job to negotiate significantly higher pay or significantly higher wages for their members. The town has to shoulder those costs. And then we have inflation well beyond what it has been and what it was predicted to be, right? When we live in a world where maybe you're going to have 2 or 3% inflation, and all of a sudden you're having years where it's 8 or 9%, it drives up the costs of all of the things that we need to buy dramatically. And every single person has felt this, right? We know it in our grocery bills, in our gas prices, and all of those areas. Inflation has hit. It's hit the town too, and going back to the first thing, and the tax base isn't growing anywhere near fast enough to keep up with any of those items. So that was the challenge we were faced with this year, is we could just, balance the budget the same way that we've always done it by utilizing all these funds and kicking the can down the road for another year, or we could take this opportunity to fix it as best as possible. So that's what we've been trying to do, is figure out how we could go about fixing some of these structural issues. None of them are easy. None of them happened overnight. And none of them are going to be a magic bullet that changes dramatically, everyone's life here in our community. But they all needed to be addressed this year. And if you watched any of the council meetings or if you've talked to folks, it's been pretty messy. This has been a really tough time between council members. Not everyone's gotten along. Things have been said and implied and stuff like that. That's been really, really rough. And all at the same time, our town staff has been sitting there wondering whether or not we were going to be able to pay our bills, whether or not we would be looking towards layoffs, whether or not we would be able to make cost of living increases, right? I mean, if inflation's 5% and we're not giving people raises, we're basically cutting their pay, is how it amounts to. And that has made this a really, really difficult thing. So last night we had a long conversation, one of what has been a number of them. I tried to lay out basically what I just shared, some of these root causes that have created this spot where we're at, and then a path for how we could possibly get out of this. So if you were to just look at what we were projecting for our 2024 budget, the total 2024 budget for operations was projected to be about $41.5 million. For capital, it was projected to be about $14 million, 13.84. On the capital side, we have a lot of those funds available for us because we have bonds, we still have ARPA money, we have SRF loans and things that we brought out. There's a lot of projects that are already there. But on the capital side, we're looking at a budget gap of about $1.6 million of projects that we need to undertake this year that we don't have funding for. And in capital, you plan out further than 1 year. So when we look at the capital budget for 2025, 2026, 2027, we start to see huge numbers and no more ARPA funding. The chances of us going out for another bond and bringing that money in the financial circumstances that we're in pretty low. We're looking at many, many, many millions of dollars in capital needs that the town has that we don't have funding to go for. And we don't appear to be the kind of place that, going out for grants or bond funds or federal earmarks and things like that. If we don't have any skin in the game because we're not putting any money into these projects on our own, we're just trying to borrow to pay for them, you're unlikely to get people to take you seriously and want to invest in your community if you're not investing in your community already. On the operating side, we were projecting about a $41.5 million budget and roughly a little bit under $39 million in revenue. That is utilizing every penny of one-time funds and our water and sewer electric revenue. That would still leave us with a $2.64 million gap in our operating budget. All told, we're looking at just a basic gap of about $4.3 million in operating and capital. That is not doing anything differently than what we have always done. That's how much money we would have needed to bring in order to pay all of those bills. We know that our water and sewer rates are positioned in a spot where they're slightly underperforming, meaning that by standards they should be bringing in a little bit more money. So we've already been talking about a water and sewer rate change that brings those rates up to where they're supposed to be. That would generate about an additional $1 million for the town. And then we were looking at basically needing to come up with, something like $3.2 million in additional revenue to pay the bills this year. The only way that we can do that is through taxes. It's the only other source of funding that the town has. And it would still, in that circumstance, leave us totally dependent on our water, sewer, and electric funds and one-time funds to be balancing that budget. So I sat down and I ran all of these numbers and tried to figure out, to the best of my ability, where does the town actually need to be planning for the future, to be setting aside those one-time funds in a way that they can be used for strategic investments. That's what a lot of other communities do. One-time funds are used for one-time expenses. Do you need to buy a piece of property? Is there an economic development investment that needs to be made? Do you have to undertake a project? Is there something strategic that you want to invest in? We don't have a penny to do that. There's no money in our budget to make any strategic choices. We're basically just keeping our head above water unless we start planning for those things. And we need to start putting money into capital reserves to pay for future capital projects, the ones that we already know about, the ones that we don't know about that are about to happen. We know a couple of years ago we've had problems over on Locust Street and other places with sewer line collapses. We have another sewer line or water line collapse or something like that. In North Main Street, they're out there fixing that sewer line and that water line almost weekly at this point. Those are those expenses that we're not planning for the future. In order to address all of those issues, to be able to truly start putting water, sewer, and electric funds into water, sewer, and electric infrastructure and not be reliant on one-time funds to balance our operating budget, we're looking at about an additional total of about $6 million dollars a year that would be needed by the town. And of that, about 5 million of it needs to be generated from tax revenue. That is roughly equates to about 47 cents worth of taxes. Um, just to pay for this year's stuff, we'd be looking at close to 36 cents worth of taxes in order to balance the 2024 budget. So that's what we were faced with last night is, do we kick the can down the road? Do we just keep what we're doing, borrowing, not paying our bills, and those things in order to try and keep our tax rate as low as possible? Or do we make the hard decision to fix the problem, to increase our tax rate where it needs to be, to begin putting money where it should be, rather than utilizing all of those funds wherever they happen to be needed? It forces us to have to live within our means a little bit more, but at the same time, we have to be able to afford to provide services, right? The long game here is, if we don't do these things now, what we're faced with is the possibility that we can't fund our infrastructure in our town. Meaning we can't afford to upkeep our water system or our sewer or our electric. And then we are looking to have to sell those things. That we're looking to have to put those off, and you have Tidewater or Artesian or whoever it is, or you have Delmarva Power, or you have whoever it happens to be that comes in. We have to sell all of this off to them because we can't afford to fix it, and we can't afford to keep it up or make the investments that we're required to do because of the property that was annexed into town, decades ago, that we have to legally provide services to. And not only do we lose the ability to control those things if we have to sell them off, but they still generate some revenue that we can use for the town. Every town who owns their own utilities uses those utilities to help keep their property taxes lower. We will still be using around $2 million a year out of our water, sewer, and electric to fund operations. And that's not an unheard of number. It's a pretty reasonable number. It's way better than $5.5 million, which is where we're headed this year if we didn't make any significant changes. And then that difference is that $3.5 million is money going into infrastructure. It's the down payment on those big infrastructure projects that we have. It's capital reserves. That means when we need to place a big order for pad mount transformers, we don't have to borrow money to do it. We've got reserves, and we can buy 3 years worth at a time, because it's 2 to 3 years worth at a time, and not have to worry about where that money is going to come from. So a lot of conversation. We went around. It was maybe not quite 2 hours worth of conversation, but for the meeting last night. But you can imagine, many, many, many hours of other meetings and things going into this, talking with the staff. In the end, the council, in my opinion, did the hard thing and the right thing, which is we voted to fix the problem. Rather than do it halfway and hope that there would be the political will to try and do the other half next year, we voted to do the full tax increase that we know is coming, and sort of pull the Band-Aid off. It is certainly going to make some people really upset. Smyrna has had amazingly low taxes for a very long time. The only reason why taxes have been as low as they are is because we've not been paying some of our bills and we've been borrowing like crazy. I know that isn't what people want to hear. It's an unpopular thing, but we have to do the right thing at a certain point in time. And fortunately, last night, council did the right thing. We're all going to be pretty unpopular people around town for a little while, I think. But in the end, if we don't do the right thing, it will be worse, right? If had this been done 3 cents a year for the last 10, 15 years, the total increase would have been lower. It would have been easier and people wouldn't have noticed it as much. It would have been easier to swallow. But unfortunately, that didn't happen, right? A couple of cents a year to reflect the increasing costs of the town, and we would be probably in a slightly better spot than we're at right now. But we don't have a choice. We can't go back in time and make different choices for the last 15 years. We have to live with what we're presented with today. And I think that it's taken a while for people to own up to and understand that, to reflect on the realities that are coming towards us if we don't make hard decisions, and then do the unpopular thing, which is what we did last night, which is vote to make probably the largest tax increase that this town has ever seen. Now we're going to follow that up with changes in how we track our money, how we balance our money, what the expectations are for our staff in planning and executing, especially on the capital side. We need to behave differently than we have in the past, or we risk 20 years from now being back in a similar position. So I think that's the next big challenge we have, is how do we now take this hard work and make it meaningful, make it the kind of thing that folks end up being proud of this community for, right? There's lots of things that we need to do. We need better infrastructure. We need to figure out the right ways to invest in our parks. We need to invest in ways that help attract more jobs and more economic opportunity. Invest in things that grow our tax base faster than our tax than our expenses. But you have to be intentional to do those things. They're not just going to happen on their own. No amount of wishful thinking is going to bring those along. I think those are those realities that we've got to sort of live within. So there's going to be a lot of work in the next couple of weeks and months. We're already 3 months into the budget year. Just going back and putting this in and beginning to truly track against these numbers is going to be a big task for our finance department. Starting pretty much right away with planning for what 2025 is going to need to look like, because we don't want to be behind on this. We want to be up front and understand exactly where these expenses are going to be, and then start looking for the additional resources and things, the grants and stuff like that are going to be necessary on the capital side to help fund the big projects we have, right? We've got $15 million that's going to need to be used to build a new electric substation. We just put in a new switch because increased demands on the town, but at a certain point in time, we've got to add additional capacity. We're looking at water and sewer infrastructure projects, the East Commerce Street project. There'll be a North Main Street project. There'll be projects to the north side of town. People are going to see a lot of these things going on. That's your tax dollars at work, trying to make sure that the infrastructure for our community is there for today and for the long term. So I want to keep communicating about this. We're going to work with the town staff to try and put together a communications plan to talk about this more and more often, so that people are more informed about the challenges that the town has and the actions that we're taking in order to try and address them. There's a lot there. If you've made it through this video, congratulations. As always, I'm happy to talk about this. I think the more people that know about it, the more people that are informed, the better. There certainly will be people, on Facebook and other things who complain and thrash, but they're not showing up to meetings and they're not participating. So I'm not sure what to do about those folks. But those folks who do participate, who do have questions, who do reach out and want actual real information, I'm always here to try and provide that for folks. So I'll keep you updated. As I said, I'll try and find a way to share some of this information that I shared with the council last night, to more clearly articulate sort of what these challenges are. I will say this has been the hardest thing I've ever had to do in my time on council. But it was also rewarding to see other council members in the end do the right thing, to see our staff come together to understand and advocate for the needs of this community. Nothing nothing good is ever easy kind of thing, and I think that that's sort of what we went through in the last couple of months. Um, Now there's more work to do. So, thank you, as always. Hope everybody has a wonderful holiday weekend, Easter plans, and all those fun things. And if you're like my family, we've got spring break to deal with, so always a good time. Take care.